Cat got your tongue? For a lot of people, saying what's on their mind these days is a game of Russian roulette. They're bound to upset someone and thereby shunned from society. This raises into question what's happened to the First Amendment, the right to free speech. We're joined by David Hoffman, founder of the Hoffman Law Firm, who will tell us exactly what has happened to our freedom of speech. David, it's so good to see you again.
It's great to see you.
I kind of loaded the top here with a lot of stuff. You know, cancel culture, I think we're giving too much oxygen to this because a few people out there who cannot respect the idea or speech of someone else, free thought, they got something to say about it, they want to shut people down. I think our viewers are certainly open-minded enough to know that you don't have to like what the other person is saying, but to know there is something called the First Amendment to the Constitution.
Well, this is a special day for me because we've talked about a lot of great things on this segment, but what we've stumbled across today is actually, this is my favorite amendment of the U.S. Constitution. It is the entire amendment embodies why we are a free democratic government. There are 5 parts of it. It covers a number of things, but I think what we're talking about today is freedom of speech. And what you had said leading in about people realizing that you don't necessarily have to like what the other person is saying. Now, the free speech is actually much more beautiful than that because you can actually hate what the other person is saying. It can drive you crazy. You could come unglued with the idea of what that person across from you is saying. But the beauty of the free speech, the beauty of the First Amendment is that we understand that as a free society, not only should you hear it, it's required that you hear it. It's required that you accept the other view, and you are free from government censorship. Because that's really what it was designed to prevent is government censorship. The government coming along and saying, you can't do this, you can't say this, you can't object to my policies, you can't object to whatever we're doing as your government, you have to be quiet. And that's why it was enacted. And so without the First Amendment, without free speech, we would be a completely different country right now.
Most definitely. And I think people don't realize that while you can hate what the other person is saying, you have those same rights to respond and to say what you feel is true and right. And then that other person has the right to hate what you're saying.
Absolutely. And actually, if you go back into our founding fathers, especially lately, we've heard that term used a lot. But if you read the Federalist Papers, which were notes written by the framers of the Constitution, they understood just how important this was. And if you think about where we were as a country, coming from a background where we couldn't voice our opinions, and a lot of countries couldn't voice. Citizens of different countries could not voice their opinions. It's my favorite amendment. That's why it's number 1. I think a lot of people, their favorite amendment was the Second Amendment, but without the First Amendment, you can't argue about the Second Amendment.
Well, this is very true. But the reason why we're talking about this, just for everyone's edification here, is that there was a case that was raised in Georgia. And it brings up another issue. So I'll just give everyone a very brief synopsis on what happened. A student at a public college in Georgia wanted to hand out some religious pamphlets. And he was doing so in, I believe, one part of campus. The college told him, you need to do it in this free speech zone. So he said, fine, I'll do it over there. But then they still had a problem once he moved and wanted to shut him down. Well, there were 2 rulings that came out of this back and forth that were considered a moot case, which I want to talk a little bit about as well. But the college essentially conceded. They said, you know what, you're right. We were wrong. But this case went up to the Supreme Court. And then once it came up to the Supreme Court, there was an 8-1 decision in favor of the student. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, so yeah, it's really interesting because I don't know that there would be any judges left if people capitulated halfway through and said, you know what, you're right, mea culpa, but the plaintiff continued to go on up all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And basically, in this case, it was the thing that kept the issue relevant, if you will, is the claim for nominal damages. So the school capitulated. The school admitted they were wrong in restricting the students passing out of the religious flyers. They admitted it. They paid the students legal fees, but the students then took it to the Supreme Court over a claim of nominal damages, which was $1, is my understanding. It was $1. And they basically got an opinion from the justices saying, yeah, the school was wrong. Well, the school had already admitted that they were wrong. So, in that sense, I kind of wonder what really was gained. But, this case brings up a whole lot. There are more questions that I have. What exactly, why would the school, number one, why does the school need a free speech zone? Isn't that America? Isn't America a free speech zone? I've never really understood that. You've got to what? You've got to corner off a part of the playground that says you can speak freely here?
Apparently so at this particular college, but this is the point, and I need to take a break here, but when we come back, I want to talk about the one dissension from that decision, and that was Justice John Roberts, and I want to talk a bit about that because it's really interesting. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're here with David Hoffman. We've been talking about a case that came out of Georgia that raises the question of freedom of speech, and so 8-1. The dissension by Justice John Roberts was that he basically said what the two lower courts said, which was it was a moot case because the student was bringing about damage of $1, but it was material, it was something. But the campus, the academic institution already said, like, you were right in your ability to pass out the stuff. However, Justice John Roberts, he still had a problem with that. Can you talk a little bit about why you think that is significant?
Sure. The reason John Roberts, Chief Justice, the reason this is the first time he has been alone in a dissent in his 16 years on the bench.
Wow.
And I sort of see where he's coming from. Is the United States Supreme Court, are they really there to issue advisory opinions? In other words, an advisory opinion is kind of, if there's no real material issue in front of them, courts typically don't just issue an opinion anyway, saying, yeah, I understand that the school capitulated. I understand they paid for all your legal expenses. I understand that you really weren't damaged with actual damages. I understand that all you want's $1, so we're going to issue this massive opinion anyway. Typically, for something like free speech, it's like the flag burning or burning your draft card during Vietnam. That's when those are the real tough First Amendment cases that the Supreme Court, in my mind, should be reserved for. I don't know if you recall, but during Vietnam, burning of the draft card, where that was determined to be symbolic free speech, although the person was still found guilty of destroying government property, but the speech itself was not censored. That's where I think the Supreme Court gets their most mileage. That's where we need the Supreme Court. I'm not sure we need a Supreme Court to decide a $1 damage case where the defendants have already capitulated, and that's, I think, where John Roberts was coming from.
Do you think that it was the initial decision by the campus, by the school, to say the student was not allowed, this public college was not allowed, or he was not allowed to pass out this religious paperwork? I mean, yes,
Leyla,
you can say, oops, sorry, no, you're right. But initially, their knee-jerk reaction was to prevent him from doing it.
I totally agree with you, 100%. It seems like a galactically stupid decision for the school to make, on its face. There are always more facts out there. And so there's a second part of the First Amendment, or another part, which Congress shall make no law prohibiting, regarding the establishment of religion.
Right.
And perhaps, since this was a public school, perhaps the school was concerned that maybe they were violating that clause of the First Amendment. And so it could have been that it had nothing to do with the speech itself. Maybe they thought they were, helping in another area, and then it just got commingled. And then probably once they received guidance, they said, look, you're fine. Because I cannot imagine that anybody would prevent a student from, the whole thing's silly. Why was there a free speech zone to begin with? That still kills me.
That is true. Like you said, all of America is a free speech zone. Unfortunately, that's where we have to leave it, both fortunately and unfortunately, David. But, I think we've just barely hit on the tip of the iceberg this broader idea of free speech, and that it is still a part of the Constitution, and we should all feel free to exercise it.
Absolutely.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you as well. Thank you.
Back after this.